moments in life. We all have them. Moments that change everything. Before the moment, we were something else. And then something happened, and after that moment, we were something different. Turning 16. We have a couple brand new 16-year-olds in church right now, and there's this crazy magical thing that happens. You turn 16, and all of a sudden, you have this potential, this incredible potential and responsibility to drive a car around. Freedom, responsibility. Get yourself somewhere, run into people, and take great financial responsibility. Like, it's a big deal. It's a change. It's a moment that we mark. A wedding. You walk down the aisle, a single person. The moment passes, the music changes, and you walk back up the aisle, and you're something different. You're something different. There's a partnership. There's a commitment. There's a covenant. There's another person who's going to be committed to honoring you, and you're honoring them. It's different. And we remember these moments that we have in our life. We mark them. That's what anniversaries are all about, you know? And so we remember wedding anniversaries, or we remember anniversaries. Men, we remember the wedding anniversaries because that's important, right? We remember sobriety birthdays. Why? Because that's a moment that changed our lives. We have holidays like the 4th of July. And, you know, for us, mostly the 4th of July is picnics and fireworks. But really, the reason we mark that is because of something that happened in history that changes our lives right now. Right? Because of something that happened in history, we have the capacity to live right now in a different kind of world, a different kind of life. And so we mark those moments. And Easter, the Passion Week, Pascha, it's one of those moments that we remember because Easter changed everything. It was brisk spring morning, still dark on the outskirts of town. A cemetery. Before this moment, everything was dark and quiet. Before this moment, the followers of Jesus, they were stunned. Their morale was broken. The events of the past few days had completely stripped away everything that they hoped for. Their trust in Jesus was failing. I mean, if he had been who he said he was, how could this have happened? And in that moment, in that broken circumstance, it felt like God was distant. It felt like circumstances were crushingly unfair. Hope seemed impossible before this moment. And then a half-ton stone rolls away, and light explodes, and soldiers run for their lives, and something happens that changes everything. Death. Death, one of the most inevitable powers of our lives, is broken as Jesus walks whole and alive out of the tomb. And that moment changes everything. Jesus was dead, now Jesus was alive. Hope had been lost, now it was restored. Before this moment, the followers of Jesus had been in aching grief and confusion and loss, and soon they would be on fire. Death used to have the final say for everyone. And now love and life has the final word. Now it's very common in church on Easter for us to talk about what all this means for you personally. Why does the resurrection matter for you and your journey and your relationship with God? And when we decide to follow Jesus, the power of the resurrection takes up residence in us. This is a new thing. And it means that we can have restored hope and a new start, and we can experience God bringing life where there was death, a reconciled relationship with God and reconciled relationships with each other, and healing and forgiveness and a sense of purpose and meaning. That's all what happens for us as individuals because of Easter. And that's the conversation we started last week. If you missed it, you can catch up on our YouTube channel. But Easter is not all about you. That morning, when the tomb blew open and Jesus walks victorious over death out of the tomb, it wasn't just the disciples' personal lives that were different. It wasn't just their personal relationship with God that was different. It wasn't just their own story that had changed. They became a community of the resurrection. And that's the moment that it happened. Now, when we think about churches or groups or clubs, social groups. We have all these reasons in our mind why people would want to hang out together, sociological reasons and psychological reasons and story reasons, all the reasons why we think people want to be together. Hanging out with people you're comfortable with, or with people you're comfortable with because they're the people you want your kids to hang out with, or spending time with people who believe like you do, or people who have a shared interest with you, or you share causes, or you both share a strange desire for potlucks, whatever you have. There's this need that you have to be together. We have these ideas about those needs. But here's the thing. The early church was not sticking together for these reasons. In fact, historically, before this moment, they were not sticking together at all. Their lives, what they had been building toward, was shattered. Everything that they'd hoped for had gone away. The ones who were expecting Jesus to bring a physical, material freedom to Israel and overthrow the Romans, that had gone away. It wasn't happening. And the ones who maybe understood a different picture, had a different picture, they weren't seeing what was happening either. Everything was gone. They were afraid for their lives. They were hiding in the upper room, just hoping against hope that the authorities would overlook them. And they were beginning slowly, one by one and two by two, to sneak out of Jerusalem. Why were they doing that? Because they were thinking about how they were going to go salvage some bit of their life from before Jesus. So you've got to see this. The ethical teachings of Jesus were not enough to hold them together in community. 3 years of following Jesus and watching Jesus and seeing miracles and hearing him teach was not enough to hold them together in community. There was no charismatic leader standing at the front of the room on a floor 3 feet higher telling them what needed to happen next and how they were going to be. There was nothing like that. There was no new religion. Nothing. And that is exactly how it would have stayed. These people would have just been reabsorbed back into their old lives and their old communities. And that would have been the end of the story. But that is not what happened. When Jesus came out of the grave, something new was created. When Jesus appeared to the disciples, first it was the upper room, the 12 of them and some other folks that hung out, upper room. But that wasn't the only time. A little later, it was out in public, 500 people, lots of witnesses. And then even later than that, it was in Galilee, again in public, lots of witnesses. When Jesus appeared to them alive, something happened. Something was created that did not exist before. Before was gone. Before was lost. They were together because Jesus was alive. After this moment, they were together because Jesus was alive. A new kind of community, the community of the resurrection, had come into being. And everything that they did from here on out came from this. When you read the book of Acts and you listen to the letters and you see what the life of the early church was about, you hear this message over and over and over again. And because of it, they did things. They shared their life together and they shared their resources and they took care of each other and they invited in people that were marginalized and broken. And they did all this. Why? Because the resurrection had happened and because it was happening in them. When the first Christians shared their story, and we have records of what they said, they did not tell other people that they found this great new idea for living. They did not tell other people that they had this great new religion that you've got to check out. They didn't tell other people that there's this great ethical teacher who's going to teach you a great new way to live. That's not what they said. What they said was, God has raised Jesus from the dead. That was their cry. That was their message. Here's just one example. This is in Acts chapter 2. If you want to join Acts chapter 2, starting in verse 22. I'll have it on the slides as well. This is from a sermon that Peter preached. And listen to the message that he's sharing. One of the first Christian sermons. Men of Israel, listen to these words. This Jesus, the Nazarene, was a man pointed out to you by God with miracles, wonders, and signs that God did among you through him, just as you yourselves know. Though he was delivered up according to God's determined plan and foreknowledge, you used lawless people to nail him to a cross and kill him. God raised him up, ending the pain of death because it was not possible for him to be held by it. That was their message. God raised Jesus from the dead. This is why they were together. This is why there even was a community. This is why they shared the story of Jesus with other people. This is why, as circumstances changed and they were forced to travel the world, they kept sharing what this was about. This is why they faced hardship and persecution and opposition. Why? Because of this. Because God raised Jesus from the dead. That changed everything. Because they had seen Jesus alive and they had seen the resurrection at work in them. This is the basis of why there was a community at all. This was the basis of their confidence. This is the reason why Paul could say this absolutely crazy, insane thing in Romans chapter 8. It's talking about the difficulties that we face in life. What then are we to say about these things? Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who is against us? He did not even spare his own son, but offered him up for us all. How will he not also with him grant us everything? Who can bring accusation against God's elect? God's the one who justifies. Who is the one who condemns? Jesus Christ is the one who died, but even more is the one who has been raised. He is also at the right hand of God and intercedes for us. Who can separate us from the love of Christ? Can affliction or anguish or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? No. In all these things, we are more than victorious through him who loved us. For I am persuaded that not even death or life, angels or rulers, things present or things to come, hostile powers, heights or depths, or any other created thing will have the power to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. How is it that Paul could say, for I am persuaded of this? Some versions say, for I am convinced. How could Paul say, for I am convinced, and then lay out this incredible beyond belief description? He's not practicing positive mental attitude. These are not like motivational Facebook posters. He is speaking the truth based on the reality of the resurrection. That's why he could say, I'm convinced of this. Because Jesus is alive and I have seen the resurrection at work in me. Jesus really came back from the dead. That really happened in history. But more than that, the resurrection was still happening in the community of Jesus' followers. And why did they do what they did? Because they saw it happening in their lives. They saw transformation. They saw new life. They saw new growth. They saw masters and slaves having completely different kinds of relationships than they were having anywhere else. They saw husbands and wives come into a completely different kind of relationship. They saw people reaching out to broken, to outcasts, to the people that society had said, no, you're excluded, no, you're unworthy, and bringing them in. They saw life coming where there had been death. And because they saw it and because they experienced it, they shared it with their friends and their neighbors. And their friends and their neighbors saw it. And because they saw and experienced it, they shared it with their friends and their neighbors. And because they saw and experienced, they shared it with their friends and their neighbors. And they shared it with their friends and their neighbors. And they shared it with their friends and their neighbors until a year ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago, somebody shared it with you. And here you are, a part of a community of followers of Jesus. A community that only exists because of the resurrection. A part of the community of the resurrection. And what does that mean for us? What does that look like in our lives? How do we do resurrection community? I mean, does this mean that we gather every week and sing some songs and listen to a lecture? No, that is not what it's about. Does it mean that we have a potluck every month? No, it's not what that's about. Being a community of the resurrection is much deeper than that, because resurrection is about bringing life where there once was death. And so it means that we take forgiveness seriously, even when it costs us something. And it means that we always work towards reconciliation insofar as it depends on us. Why? Because we know that forgiveness and reconciliation are resurrection of relationships. It means that we don't draw our lines of who's out and who's in too firmly. Because we know that our God has a history of bringing to life things that were dead. And our God has a history of bringing in people who have messy stories and who don't fit the narrative and don't look like us. That's what we know. We've seen it, and so we know resurrection brings life where there was death in unexpected places, and so we're open to let God do that the way God wants to do. It means that we welcome broken people. Why? Because we know that emotional healing and psychological healing and spiritual healing and even physical healing are part of resurrection. And so we wait expectantly, and we create the opportunity. It means that we don't let each other sink as best we can. We reach out our hands as we can. We lend our time and our talents and our resources so that everybody has a chance. Why? Because we know that sometimes a meal or help with the gas bill or a night of babysitting or a listening ear are all little moments of resurrection, little moments where life comes in, where there could have been death. And it means that we get willing, even though it's hard, to do the hard work of honesty with each other and with God so that we can grow spiritually, so that our spiritual journey isn't just coming, sitting, listening, and going, but that our spiritual journey is an ongoing, developing relationship with Jesus that changes us. Why? Because as we open ourselves to growth, the resurrection is alive, working in us. And so some of us in this community, in this room, some of us are on purpose putting ourselves in places where resurrection can happen. Look around. Resurrection is happening here, in these hearts, in these lives. How is it happening? What does it look like? How is resurrection shaping our community? Well, I'll tell you some of the stories. Some of us here in this room go to our recovery meetings every week and sit beside our sponsors, and we keep coming back even though we don't want to, because that's a place where resurrection happens. And some of us are going into the hard places and the hard conversations that are going to bring renewal and restoration to our marriages, even though it's really hard, because that's a place where resurrection happens. And some of us are getting the help that we need to be peaceful, life-giving parents so that we can change the cycle that's happened in our family and the future of our children can be different. Why? Because that's a place where resurrection happens. Some of us are reaching out to old friends that we have a broken relationship with and risking hurt and rejection. And some of us are setting aside a little bit of money every month just so that we can have something that when we come across someone who's in need, we can just bless them without worrying. Some of us have an extra compartment in our wallet for that purpose. And some of us show up early on Saturday mornings, some of us every Saturday morning, to turn on the lights and open the doors and warm up the coffee maker, set up the stage and practice the music. And some of us, not enough, but some of us make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at Milwaukee High School for high school students who are hungry. And the funny thing is that what they're getting out of that is not just food, but what they're getting by their own testimony is a safe place. That is a place where resurrection is happening. And some of us in this room have put our arms around the shoulders of friends or family who are gay or lesbian or transgendered, and we've looked them in the eye and we've said, I don't know how to do the math on this. I don't understand all the theology and the biology, but I know that you matter to God, and I love you. And some of us send a little bit of money every month so that Pastor Stephen Turankikiko in Rwanda can keep a roof over the head of his family and the more than 20 orphans who live with him. And some of us keep showing up when the days are hard and the budget gets cut again and it looks like maybe the leaders really don't have it all together, and we just keep coming back because maybe this is a place where resurrection can happen. And we do these things because Jesus is alive. Not just because Jesus came out of the tomb 200 generations ago, but because that resurrection is alive in us and in this place, and it can change our hearts now. The resurrection of Jesus matters to us, not as a point of theology, my friends, but because it is the power that lives within us to live out Jesus' life now, today. Yeah, the moment that we celebrate this weekend, it changed everything. It changed everything for you. But it also launched a new kind of community. Do you see? Not just a community that talks about something that happened 2,000 years ago. Not just a community that says, if you don't believe exactly like we do about something that happened 2,000 years ago, we're going to have to put you out. No, a community that walks in the resurrection today. A community that walks in the resurrection now, which means that we've got to walk close to the places of death. Why? Because that's where resurrection happens. We have to get close to the places of death and pain in our lives and in each other's lives and in the world that we live in, because that is where God is going to show up and bring new life. We are a community that lives today in the power of Jesus' resurrection. And we're going to keep on doing that until Jesus comes back, because we are people of the resurrection. We are a community of the resurrection. And that means that we can join with the early church and say, like Romans 8:11, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And that changes everything.